The town looked almost unreal after the hollow mile. Too bright, too alive. Streetlights hummed. Car tires whispered against asphalt, and neon signs flickered outside diners that never closed. Laura sat slumped in the passenger seat of Ramirez's SUV, her eyes fixed on the blur of it all, unable to shake the echo of stone cracking and voices screaming. She should have felt relief. They had made it out. They were alive. But her wrist burned beneath her sleeve, the faint ink-like markings etched into her skin, no matter how hard she scrubbed at them with a rag soaked in alcohol. The ridge might have collapsed, but it had left its mark inside her. Ramirez parked outside the sheriff's office, but neither of them moved to get out. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face pale. "We don't write this up," he said quietly. "We don't tell anyone what we saw. They'll lock us both up." Laura gave a humorless laugh. "You think I'm worried about my badge after this? You saw it too. You saw their faces." He looked at her then, his voice low. "I saw you light the damn thing on fire. Whatever you did, it worked. But I also saw what's on your arm." Her jaw clenched. She tugged her sleeve down further, hiding the symbol. "It's nothing." "Bullshit." His word hung heavy between them. She didn't argue. Instead, she pushed the door open and stepped into the night air. The quiet was oppressive, too normal. After days of mist and stoned voices, the silence felt like another trap. Inside the station, Laura spread out the remains of their evidence on the desk. The cracked compass, Jenny's notebook, the fragments of the Polaroid she had burned. Ramirez shut the blinds tight, locking the door behind them. They worked in silence for a long time, each piece of evidence heavier than the last. Finally, Laura spoke. "It's not over." Ramirez looked up sharply. "What are you talking about? You burned it. We saw it collapse." She lifted her wrist, rolling the sleeve back to show him the faint black mark. "Then explain this." His face tightened. He didn't have an answer. Laura stared at the notebook Alyssa had sketched in, her pencil drawings of flowers and ridgelines. She imagined those hands, frozen inside the stone, begging her to free them. She had given them fire. She had tried to burn the archive out of existence. But something still lingered. That night, she dreamed of the ridge. She was back in the cavern, standing before the monolith. But instead of thousands of names, there was only one. Cain. The stone cracked, light bleeding through. And from within, her own face stared out, mouth open in a scream. She woke with her throat raw. Ramirez shaking her shoulders. "Laura, you were screaming." She shoved him off, trembling. "It's inside me." The following days blurred together. Official reports listed the case of the 4 missing hikers as closed pending discovery. Sheriff's deputies glanced at Laura with suspicion, some whispering about her condition. She could feel the weight of the ridge in her chest, like a second heartbeat. When she closed her eyes, she heard whispers. Sometimes they were the voices of Daniel and Alyssa. Sometimes her own. Voss never returned. No trace of him was found, not in the ridge, not in the valley. Ramirez thought he had been buried when the cavern collapsed. Laura wasn't so sure. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Laura sat alone at her kitchen table, with Jenny's notebook open in front of her. The last page, the one that ended mid-sentence, seemed to shimmer in the dying light. "I can hear," she wrote below it, her hand trembling. "I can hear them too." The page pulsed faintly, the ink glowing for a second before fading. Laura dropped the pen, her chest heaving. The ridge wasn't just memory carved into stone. It had found a new medium. That night, Ramirez stormed into her apartment, his face grim. "We need to end this, Laura, before it spreads." "How?" she asked, her voice sharp. "We tried fire, we tried breaking it. It's still here." He placed a revolver on the table between them. His expression was steady, but his voice cracked. There's one way left. If it lives in you, then you end it with you. Her blood went cold. You want me to? I don't want anything, he interrupted. But if you carry this thing, it won't stop. It'll bleed into everything you touch. Every case. Every person. You said yourself it needs witnesses. Don't give it any more. She stared at the revolver for a long time. Her reflection gleamed faintly in the steel, pale and hollow. Finally, she pushed it back toward him. No. If it marked me, then maybe I can use that. Maybe I can lead it into silence, instead of feeding it. End it without ending me. Ramirez clenched his jaw. That's not a gamble you can win. Maybe not, she admitted. But I'm not going to vanish the way they did. I won't let the ridge write the ending. She stood, grabbing Jenny's notebook, clutching it to her chest. If this thing wants a witness, I'll be one. But I'll tell the story on my terms. Not as its archive, as its destruction. Ramirez looked at her with something between pity and admiration. Then I'm with you. To the end. She gave a hollow smile. Careful, the end might be closer than we think. The ridge no longer whispered at the edge of her thoughts. It screamed, but she had made her choice. If it wanted her as its memory, she would poison it. With her defiance, she didn't know if she would survive it, but she knew she would not surrender. Some stories deserve to end, and this one would end with her. If you found this story chilling and captivating, don't forget to support the channel. More vanishings, more mysteries, more stories that will keep you awake at night are coming your way. Subscribe to Vanished Events so you never miss the next haunting tale. The plateau stretched endlessly. The ground beneath their boots cracked and dry like the skin of something ancient. The air was heavier here, every breath dragging smoke and iron into Laura's lungs. Ramirez walked a few paces ahead, flashlight beam trembling across the emptiness, while Voss staggered behind, mumbling to himself in broken fragments. Laura kept her eyes locked on the dark ridge looming in the distance. It pulsed faintly with light, the symbols carved into its cliffs glowing like embers in a dying fire. Every step closer, the whispers grew louder, no longer echoes but voices pressed directly against her ears. They spoke in fragments, her name, the names of the 4 friends, 1,000 more she didn't recognize. It felt as though the stone itself was alive, breathing memories in and out. After hours of trudging, they reached a fissure at the base of the ridge. It yawned open like a wound, wide enough for a person to enter if they stooped low. The glow inside was steady, a sickly orange that flickered as though a fire burned deep within. Ramirez turned, sweat dripping down his temple, despite the cold. You're really going in there? Laura's jaw tightened. If this place has a heart, it's in there. If we don't end it, it won't just keep us. It'll keep pulling others. Voss dropped heavily onto the ground, clutching his head. You can't end it. I've tried. I've burned cairns, shattered stones, walked for days in every direction. Always I come back. Always it remembers. You don't destroy a memory, detective. You live in it. Laura crouched in front of him, her voice steady but fierce. Then tell me what it wants. You've been here 20 years. You know more than anyone. His eyes, bloodshot and wet, lifted to hers. It wants witnesses. That's all it's ever wanted. People to carry the story, so it never fades. That's why it marked you. That's why it marked me. We are the pages in its book. You think you're solving cases, giving families peace, but you're just feeding it. Every missing face you remember, every detail you obsess over, that's the ridge writing itself into you. Laura felt her stomach lurch. In the back of her mind, she knew he was right. Every case she had ever taken home, every sleepless night, staring at old files, it was all because she couldn't let them go. And now the ridge had carved her name, because she was already half its. But she wasn't ready to surrender. If it wants a witness, then I'll give it one. The last one. And then I'll burn the book shut. Ramirez swore under his breath. You're talking about suicide. No, Laura said firmly. I'm talking about ending it. If the ridge survives on memory, then I'll give it something it can't contain. I'll make it choke. She pulled the Polaroid from her pouch, the one showing the four friends with the fifth figure behind them. The ink shimmered faintly in the orange glow, as though alive. This photo is proof it manifests in the real world. It leaks. That's how it pulls more people. If I can turn its own witness against it. Voss shook his head violently. You'll only bury yourself deeper. That's what it wants. Laura rose, ignoring him, and led Ramirez toward the fissure. Inside, the tunnel was narrow and damp, walls slick with condensation that tasted metallic in the air. Symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly, leading them deeper like veins pumping light. The further they walked, the louder the voices became, until they were a deafening chorus. Finally, the tunnel widened into a cavern. Laura froze. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center rose a monolith of stone, taller than a house, covered head to toe in carvings. Names, thousands of names, some fresh, others so old they were nearly eroded away. The four friends' names glowed brightest, as though freshly etched, and beneath them, Cain. The stone pulsed like a beating heart. With every pulse, the voices surged. Ramirez whispered, Jesus Christ. Laura stepped forward, her body trembling, every instinct telling her to run. But she forced herself closer. As she approached, she noticed cracks running through the stone, light spilling from within. And in those cracks, faces, dozens, hundreds, their mouths moved in silent screams, their eyes locked on hers. Daniel, Alyssa, Mark, Jenny, all staring out, their pale faces twisted in anguish. Laura's knees nearly gave. Oh God! The stone shuddered. A piece flaked away, hitting the ground with a sharp crack. The faces shifted, and Daniel's pushed closer to the surface, his hand stretching outward through the crack, as if trying to claw free. His voice echoed inside her skull, sharp and clear. Help us. Tears blurred her vision. For a split second, she wanted to reach out, to pull him free. But another thought struck her like a knife. If she touched him, she would be pulled inside too. Voss stumbled into the chamber, falling to his knees in front of the monolith. Do you see now? Do you see what it keeps? I told them not to go. I told them. He slammed his fists against the stone, sobbing. It won't let go. The ground shook. Cracks spread wider, more faces pushing out, voices screaming louder. Ramirez grabbed Laura's arm. This is insane. We need to leave now. Laura tore her arm free. There's no leaving. Not unless we stop it. She pulled a flare from her pack, striking it alive. The red light filled the cavern, casting the faces in bloody shadow. She pressed it against the monolith. Smoke hissed, but the stone didn't burn. The ridge roared in response, the sound deafening. The chamber shook, dust falling in choking clouds. Voss screamed, You can't destroy it. You can only feed it. Laura's mind raced. If fire couldn't kill it, maybe memory could. She yanked out the Polaroid, holding it high. You want a witness? She shouted at the stone. Here's your witness. See what you've become. The photo burned hot in her hand, the image glowing. The monolith pulsed harder, the faces within, twisting, shrieking. The photo burst into flame, crumbling to ash. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then the stone cracked wide open. A blinding light spilled out, throwing Laura and Ramirez to the ground. The voices screamed as one, not in pain, but in rage. The cavern shook violently, chunks of rock raining down. Through the blaze, Laura saw them, Daniel, Elissa, Mark, Jenny, stepping forward, their faces no longer hollow, but alive, eyes wide with terror. They reached for her, not to drag her in, but to beg her to finish. Laura's voice broke as she screamed, "I won't let you keep them." She grabbed the last flare, striking it and hurling it into the heart of the monolith. The crack erupted in fire, light searing so bright it burned her vision white. The ridge roared again, louder than anything she had ever heard, a sound like the earth itself splitting apart. And then, silence. Laura opened her eyes. The chamber was gone. She was lying on bare stone, under open sky, the stars above sharp and endless. Ramirez lay beside her, groaning, alive. Voss was nowhere to be seen. The ridge behind them was nothing but ordinary rock. No carvings, no glowing, just stone. Laura's chest heaved. Her hands shook as she realized what had happened. She had destroyed the archive, or so she hoped, because when she glanced at her wrist, she saw faint black ink staining her skin, a circle, a line, the same symbols from the cairns. The ridge hadn't let her go. Not completely. The smoke clung to Laura's throat as she stumbled out of the basin, half carrying Elias Voss against her shoulder. The fire at the cairn smoldered behind them, its light fading into an orange glow that barely touched the mist. Every step felt heavy, as if the ridge itself had doubled gravity, determined to drag them back into its hollow chest. "Keep moving," she told Voss, though her own legs trembled. "We're not staying." He coughed, his scarred face pale in the weak light. "You don't understand. No one leaves clean. Not once their name is carved." "Watch me," she said, forcing strength into her words, though her heart knew the truth. She had already heard the laughter, the whispers. The ridge had already marked her. Somewhere beyond the fog, a voice cut through the silence. "Laura," her head snapped up. Ramirez's voice. "Here," she shouted, her throat raw. "We're here." A beam of light broke through the mist, sweeping across the rocks, until it landed on her face. Ramirez came barreling forward, his flashlight shaking in one hand, his service pistol drawn in the other. Relief crashed through her chest. At the sight of him, he reached them, eyes widening as he saw Voss. "Holy hell, you're alive." Voss barely managed a nod. Ramirez slid beneath his other arm, taking some of his weight. "We need to move fast," Ramirez said. "The fog's closing in behind me. The trail's almost gone." Laura glanced back. He was right. The mist seemed to crawl like a living thing, swallowing the basin they had just escaped. The cairn's glow had already vanished. Together, the three of them pushed forward, following Ramirez's light. The ground sloped downward, but every landmark Laura remembered from the hike up seemed wrong. Trees twisted in unfamiliar directions, boulders out of place, the path a maze that shifted under their boots. Voss muttered under his breath, words that weren't English, his voice shaking. Prayers, maybe, or spells. Laura couldn't tell. They stopped to catch their breath at a ledge overlooking the valley. For a brief moment, the fog cleared enough to reveal the dark sprawl of forest below, stretching for miles. The faint glimmer of a town's lights in the distance. Civilization. Safety. But the ridge wasn't about to let them go. A sound rose behind them. Not chanting this time. Something heavier. A dragging, grinding noise like stone against stone. Laura spun, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. At first she thought it was the canyon wall collapsing. Then she saw it shift, shapes peeled out of the rock itself. Human shapes, arms, torsos, faces, pressing forward from the stone, as if the ridge were spitting them out. Their eyes were hollow sockets, their mouths open in silent screams. The missing, Jenny, Elissa, Daniel, Mark, their faces among dozens more. Voss whimpered, covering his eyes. Ramirez swore, lifting his gun. What the hell is that? The archive, Laura whispered. Her chest tightened, bile rising. It's trying to pull us in. The stone figures writhed, their forms stretching forward as though the wall itself were reaching for them. One cracked loose, shattering from the rock and stumbling forward. A grotesque statue made flesh. Its face was Daniel's, frozen in terror, his mouth whispering soundless words. Laura raised her weapon, but her hands shook violently. Shooting him felt like desecration, like putting a bullet through a ghost. Ramirez fired instead. The figure shattered into stone fragments, dust scattering across the ground. But the others pressed closer, clawing at the ledge, their hollow eyes fixed on Laura. We can't fight them all, Ramirez said. We run. They turned and fled along the ledge, the ground shaking beneath their boots. Laura could feel the ridge's fury now, every stone vibrating with anger. The mist whipped around them, forming hands that clawed at her jacket, voices that hissed her name. They scrambled down a steep incline, sliding on loose shale. Voss fell hard, crying out as his lantern shattered against the rocks. Darkness pressed tighter. Ramirez yanked him up, cursing under his breath. Laura's flashlight beam caught something ahead. Another cairn, this one taller, its stones stacked in a spire, black carvings, glowing faintly in the dark. Unlike the one she had burned, this one was alive, pulsing with light like a heart. We can't go near it, Voss croaked, his voice desperate. That's not a boundary. That's a gate. What do you mean, gate? Laura demanded. He shook his head frantically. It opens the way for them, for the archive to take more. Once you cross it, a sound cut him off. The grinding roar of stone splitting open, behind them. More figures tore themselves from the ridge, stumbling forward with jerky, inhuman steps. We don't have a choice, Ramirez snapped. It's that or get buried alive. Laura's chest heaved. Every instinct screamed to avoid the cairn, but the stone figures were closing in, their shadows stretching long and thin across the fog. She made her decision. Run through, she shouted. They sprinted. The cairn loomed larger, its carvings glowing brighter, the light searing her vision. As they passed, Laura felt something pull at her chest, like invisible fingers trying to rip her heart free. She screamed, forcing her legs to keep moving, and then they were through. Silence. The mist cleared suddenly, leaving them on a barren plateau. No chanting, no shadows, just empty air and the sound of their ragged breathing. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Ramirez let out a shaky laugh, dropping to one knee. Jesus Christ, I thought we were done. Voss, however, wasn't laughing. He stood rigid, staring at the cairn behind them. His voice trembled. You don't understand. You shouldn't have crossed. You don't leave through a gate. You enter. Laura's stomach turned. She spun back. The cairn's glow had dimmed, but faint whispers carried on the wind. Familiar voices. Jenny's, Alyssa's, Daniel's, Mark's. They were calling her name. The plateau stretched endlessly ahead, the valley far below unreachable. And in the distance, rising against the horizon, Laura saw something impossible. Another ridge, jagged, dark, carved with glowing symbols. A mirror of the hollow mile. And she realized with a sick twist of dread, they hadn't escaped. They had crossed deeper. Ramirez cursed when he saw it, his voice breaking. This isn't the way out. Voss collapsed to his knees, rocking back and forth. It never ends. You walk until the ridge takes you. That's the truth I didn't tell. That's why I stayed. Laura's throat tightened. Her name was carved into the stone. The ridge had marked her. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to finish it. She clenched her fists, Then we go deeper. We find the heart of this place, and we end it. The wind howled, carrying the voices of the lost. Somewhere, in the stone itself, the archive stirred. The mist thickened, until the lantern above was nothing but a halo of light, bleeding through gray. Laura steadied her weapon, her finger trembling on the trigger. Beside her, Elias Voss clutched his own lantern like it was the only anchor keeping him tethered to the earth. The chanting rose, echoing from unseen mouths, vibrating in her chest. Then the tall figure stepped forward. He moved slowly, deliberately, descending from the ridge, with the kind of ease that betrayed years of knowing every crevice, every step. The lantern swung at his side, the glow spilling across his face. Laura's breath caught. Sergeant Mallory, older now, but unmistakable. The broad jaw, the steel-gray eyes, the presence that had once commanded respect from every deputy under him. She'd seen him before in another case, tangled in another archive of vanishings. She'd watched him fall, but here he was, standing alive, carrying the lantern like a priest at a midnight mass. Mallory, Laura whispered, her voice cracking. Voss hissed beside her. I told you, the ridge doesn't let go. Mallory's gaze swept over them both, and then he smiled. Calm, patient, the smile of a man who had been waiting for years. Detective Kane, you found your way, just as I knew you would. Laura raised her gun higher, forcing steel into her voice. You're supposed to be dead. His smile widened. Dead. Alive. The ridge doesn't bother with such words. It remembers. It preserves. And so do I. The chanting grew louder, the fog swirling until shapes emerged again. Shadows, like silhouettes of people. Dozens of them, faces, blurred but postures human. They stood on the edges of the clearing, surrounding Laura. Ramirez's voice, nowhere to be heard. You did this, she spat, her voice carrying over the din. You led them here, the four friends. You guided them to their deaths. Mallory shook his head slowly. Not deaths, transitions. They were chosen. The ridge calls certain souls, ones too stubborn, too curious, too unwilling to fade. It archives them so their story never disappears. Better than bones in the dirt, forgotten by winter snows. Laura's stomach churned. You carved their names into the wall, and mine. Yes, Mallory said simply. Because you're one of us. You always were. You chased ghosts your whole career. You can't stand silence. You need the voices of the lost. That hunger is why the ridge chose you. I'm nothing like you, she hissed. Voss's hand gripped her arm, trembling. Don't listen. That's what he told me. That's how it begins. Mallory's eyes narrowed on Voss. And yet, here you are, Elias. After all these years, still clinging to your guilt like it matters. You brought them this far, and you still pretend it wasn't your hand that opened the door. Voss flinched, his scarred face twisting. I tried to warn them. You led them, Mallory said flatly. And the ridge kept them, just as it will keep her. Laura's pulse hammered. The shadows pressed closer, whispers seeping into her ears. Her name repeated over and over, until she thought her skull would split. She forced herself to shout above it. Where are they? Daniel, Mark, Alyssa. Where are their bodies? Mallory stepped closer. The lantern's glow painting deep grooves across his face. Bodies don't matter. Stories do. They're part of the ridge now. Every laugh, every scream, every heartbeat, they echo forever in stone. Listen closely, and you'll hear them. Laura shook her head violently, forcing the whispers out. No, they didn't choose this. You stole them. For the first time, Mallory's smile faltered. His eyes hardened. Choice is a lie. The archive doesn't ask. It keeps. That's the truth you can't run from. He raised the lantern higher, and the fog flared with light. For a split second, Laura saw them, the four friends, standing just beyond the glow, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, but undeniably them. Jenny clutching her notebook, Alyssa with her sketchbook pressed to her chest, Mark's hair tousled, Daniel's arm around the others. They looked at her with pleading expressions that made her throat close. And then they vanished. "Do you see?" Mallory whispered. "They're not gone. They're archived." Laura's gun trembled in her grip. The temptation to pull the trigger was overwhelming, but deep down she knew a bullet wouldn't matter here. The ridge itself bent around Mallory, feeding him, protecting him. Killing him might mean nothing at all. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "Why carve my name? Why drag me into this?" Mallory's smile returned, colder now. "Because the archive needs a witness. Someone who can carry its stories into the world beyond. Someone who understands memory is heavier than flesh. You've been chosen to replace Elias." Voss shook his head violently. Don't listen. That's what he told me too. Once you accept, there's no leaving. The ridge won't let you." Mallory's gaze never left Laura. "You can fight it, run from it, deny it, but the truth will hollow you out until you belong to nothing but the archive. Or you can accept it now, carry the stories with pride, and never vanish again." Laura's breath caught. The words clawed at her mind, weaving into the exhaustion that had defined her career. The countless cold cases, the endless unanswered questions. Mallory was right about one thing. She had never been able to let silence win. Every missing face she had chased was still etched into her memory, haunting her nights. But that didn't mean she had to become part of it. Her voice came out low, firm. "I won't be your archivist." Mallory's eyes darkened. "Then you'll be their testimony." The chanting surged, deafening now. The shadows closed in, their forms solidifying, reaching for her. Voss swung his lantern wildly, shouting words in a language Laura didn't recognize, trying to drive them back. The fog writhed, the ridge trembling underfoot. Laura fired. The gunshot cracked through the basin, echoing like thunder. Mallory staggered, the lantern dropping from his grip. The flame hissed out against the rock, plunging the clearing into near darkness. The shadows faltered. The chanting stuttered. Mallory straightened slowly, blood streaking his coat, but his eyes still burning. "Foolish," he rasped. "You can't kill what the ridge keeps." Laura's heart pounded, her mind racing. If bullets couldn't stop him, maybe fire could. She grabbed Voss's lantern, smashing it against the cairn. The oil flared, spilling flames across the carvings. The effect was instant. The shadows recoiled, the chanting twisting into screams. The ridge itself groaned, the walls shaking as if in pain. Mallory roared, staggering back, his face twisted in fury. "No," he bellowed. "You'll destroy everything." Laura lifted her gun again, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Not everything, just you." The flames licked higher, the symbols blackening, the fog thinned, the shadows dissolving into smoke. Mallory stumbled, his body collapsing beside the cairn. For the first time, he looked human, old, frail, mortal. The ridge shook once more, then fell silent. Laura stood gasping in the dim glow of the dying fire, the smell of smoke thick in her lungs. Voss collapsed beside her, his scarred face streaked with tears. "It's not over," he whispered. "The ridge never forgets. Even if you burn the marks, it still keeps the names, and yours is already written." Laura stared at the blackened stone, her own name still faintly visible beneath the char. Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Then I'll be the one to finish it," she said. Voss looked at her with something like hope or pity, and far above, hidden in the thinning mist, A faint light flickered once more. The mist pressed close, smothering every shape, every sound, until Laura felt the ridge itself was breathing against her skin. She forced herself to keep moving, one boot scraping in front of the other. Though the trail had long vanished beneath the haze, the compass from the recovered backpack rattled in her pocket, useless, its needle spinning as though the mountain had swallowed its sense of direction. She pulled out Alyssa's sketches from the first notebook and tried to orient herself. The jagged ridgeline she had drawn, the cluster of lupines, the twisted pine, none of it matched what Laura saw around her. The hollow mile wasn't just terrain, it was a labyrinth, one that shifted when you weren't watching. The radio sputtered again. Ramirez's voice struggled through static. Laura, do you copy? Her thumb pressed the receiver. I'm still here. Lost the trail. Visibility's almost zero. Static hissed back. Then, faintly, get out. Not safe. The line cut. Laura stood frozen, the weight of the fog pressing harder. She glanced at the Polaroid she had stuffed into her evidence pouch. The four friends at the ridge, the fifth figure looming behind. Whoever had taken it, whoever had carved those fresh markings, they were still here, watching. Her foot struck something solid. She looked down. A cairn stacked stones, forming a rough pillar, each marked with blackened carvings. She crouched, brushing frost from its surface. These weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, repeating across multiple stones, circles, intersecting lines, runes. Her hand trembled as she remembered Elias Voss's journal. The ridge keeps what belongs to it. The cairn wasn't a marker. It was a boundary. She stepped around it and felt the air shift. The mist thinned, just enough for her to see ahead. A clearing opened in the stone, a shallow basin surrounded by jagged walls. In the center lay bone, not fresh, not whole, but human. Her chest tightened as she knelt beside them. Scraps of fabric clung to one rib cage, the remnants of a jacket sleeve. She brushed away grit and saw letters embroidered faintly on the cloth. J.T. Jenny Thompson. Laura's stomach lurched. After 20 years, the Hollow Mile had given up one of the four. But why only her? And why here? Something crunched above her. She looked up, flashlight beam, catching on the ridge wall. Carved into the stone was a series of names, weathered, but still legible. Daniel Reynolds, Mark Tanner, Alyssa Green, Jenny Thompson. Beneath them, in fresher scratches, came her breath caught, her name, carved into the wall before she had ever set foot here. She stumbled back, her boots skidding on shale, her pulse racing. Someone knew she'd come. Someone had been preparing for her. The sound rose then low, steady, like chanting carried on the wind. She spun, flashlight beam darting across the clearing, but the mist bent light into shapes that weren't there. The chanting grew louder, layered, as though multiple voices were speaking in unison, though she couldn't make out words. Laura grabbed her radio again, desperate. Ramirez, I found one of them. Jenny, bones in the basin, and someone's been here. They carved my name into the ridge. Do you copy? Static. Then a burst of noise, and Ramirez's voice. Urgent. Laura, get out now. You're walking into the... The line died. The chanting cut off. Silence fell heavy. She froze. Then, behind her, a voice. You shouldn't have come alone. Her body stiffened. Slowly, she turned. A figure emerged from the mist. Older, hunched, a heavy coat pulled tight around his frame. A face she recognized from the grainy photo in the old ranger's files. Elias Voss. He looked older, far more weathered, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity she had imagined while reading his notes. You're alive, Laura breathed. Voss nodded once. Alive, Yes, but not free. He stepped closer, and the lantern light in his hand illuminated deep grooves across his cheeks, scars like burns. His voice rasped, as though each word cost him something. I told them not to go. They didn't listen. They laughed. And the ridge doesn't forgive. Laura steadied her gun. What happened to them, Elias? Why didn't you tell the truth? His eyes flickered to the bones in the basin. Because truth doesn't matter here. The ridge remembers what it wants. It keeps what it wants. And once it marks you, his gaze fell to her evidence pouch. There's no leaving. Laura's grip tightened. Who carved my name into the wall? Boss's expression twisted, half pained, half resigned. The same ones who carved mine. He lifted his lantern. On his wrist, beneath the ragged edge of his sleeve, Laura saw fresh black ink, symbols matching the cairn. They marked me years ago. I tried to run, but every time I left, it pulled me back. You'll see, you already hear it, don't you? The voices, the laughter. Laura swallowed hard. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. The echoes had been real. Boss stepped closer, his voice lowering. The backpack wasn't lost. It was bait. They wanted you here. They need a witness. Someone to carry the story forward when the ridge takes the rest. Her stomach dropped. Ramirez's voice in her memory. You're walking into the... A witness for what? She demanded. Voss's eyes glinted. The ritual. The ground beneath them vibrated. A faint rumble that shook dust from the canyon walls. The mist swirled, coalescing into shapes that looked almost human. For a heartbeat, Laura swore she saw them. Daniel, Mark, Alyssa, standing just beyond the clearing, their faces pale, their eyes empty. She staggered back, her heart racing, the weight of the Polaroid heavy in her bag. Voss's lantern flickered, his voice rising in urgency. It's starting again. You need to leave. Now. But before she could move, another light flared from the ridge above. A lantern, held by a tall figure, whose face was hidden by the fog. The chanting returned. Louder this time, echoing from the rocks, like a chorus of the dead. Voss hissed. They've already chosen you. Laura raised her gun, but the mist thickened, shapes shifting around her, voices pressing in. And in the middle of it all, the Polaroid burned in her mind. The four friends on the ridge, the fifth figure behind them. Her blood ran cold as realization hit. The fifth figure wasn't just watching them, it had been leading them. The road to the Hollow Mile wound higher into the mountains, the pavement dissolving into gravel, then dirt. Laura's headlights cut across the trees, branches clawing at the night sky, shadows swaying like restless figures. The backpack lay on the seat beside her, the cracked compass sliding inside with every turn, the notebook whispering of voices that no longer had throats. She pulled over at the ranger station at dawn. The place looked barely alive, just a squat wooden building with peeling paint and an antenna leaning at a dangerous angle. Inside, a pot of stale coffee simmered, the air heavy with the scent of dust and pine. The ranger on duty was old, his beard a tangled nest of gray. His name tag read Harrison. He eyed the evidence bag Laura set on the counter and frowned. Haven't seen that in a long time. You recognize it? Laura asked. He nodded slowly. Not the pack itself, maybe, but the story. Yeah, those kids. The whole damn town remembers. We called off the search after 12 days. The mountains don't give back what they take. Laura opened the notebook, careful not to damage the fragile paper. Daniel Reynolds wrote about lights on the ridge. You filed a report from campers who said the same thing. Why didn't anyone follow up? Harrison's eyes clouded, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was low, almost guilty. We were told to drop it. Sheriff's orders. said it was probably hunters, said no sense wasting resources on ghost stories. But he leaned closer, lowering his voice. I saw them too. That night. Looked like lanterns. Moving against the ridge, only faster than anyone could walk. Too high up. Too smooth. Like they were gliding. Laura felt her stomach knot. Did you tell anyone? He shook his head. Not back then. Mallory shut it down. And once he shut something down, that was the end of it. Her pulse spiked at the name. Sergeant Mallory again. He had already haunted one cold case. Now he stood in the shadows of this one too. Laura thanked Harrison and stepped back into the crisp mountain air. The sun was rising, but the peaks ahead stayed cloaked in cloud, as if the hollow mile refused to surrender its secrets even to daylight. She hiked the trail, with the backpack slung across her shoulder, boots crunching against the frost-bitten ground. The air thinned as she climbed, her breath puffing white, her ears filled with the sound of her own heartbeat. The trail markers grew sparse, the path less certain. She traced the sketches Alyssa had drawn, comparing them to the flora around her. Lupine still bloomed in patches, pale purple against the stone. It was the same spot the notebook described, the same place where their laughter had once filled the air. But there was no laughter now, only silence. Hours later, she reached the ridge where the last boot print had been found. The ground here was different, looser, as though the rock had been disturbed and never quite settled again. She crouched, running her fingers through the soil, and felt something hard beneath. She pulled it free. It was a button, brass, dulled by time, the thread long rotted. Not unusual for a lost hiker, perhaps. But her gut said otherwise. She slipped it into a bag and pushed farther up the ridge. The air grew colder, the clouds thicker, until the trail seemed to dissolve into mist. Every step echoed, not just in her ears but in her chest, as though the ground itself was remembering. And then she heard it. A laugh. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A young woman's laugh, carried on the wind. Laura spun, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. No one, only jagged rock and mist. But the sound lingered, teasing the edges of her sanity. She pressed forward, following the echo, until she reached a narrow gorge that split the ridge like a scar. Here the markings began, circles etched into stone, crossed lines, the same symbols Elias Voss had drawn on his maps. Some were shallow, old, worn by weather. Others looked fresh, edges sharp, as though carved yesterday. She crouched, tracing one with her glove, and felt her stomach twist. The grooves were blackened, soot lining their depth. Burned in, her radio crackled, startling her. Ramirez's voice spilled through, distorted by static. Laura, do you copy? You've been off the grid for an hour. She pressed the receiver. I'm here. I found the markings. Same as Voss's maps. Some of them are fresh. Silence for a moment. Then Ramirez again. Get out of there. If someone's been up there recently, you're not alone. She looked around, the fog thickening, the symbols staring at her like eyes. The laugh echoed again, closer this time, and her blood ran cold. I'm not leaving, she whispered. Not until I know what happened. The gorge narrowed, forcing her to squeeze sideways through jagged rock. On the other side lay a hollow, sheltered from the wind. And there, half buried in scree, she found it, another backpack. Smaller, bright blue, the fabric faded but recognizable. Her pulse hammered as she pulled it free. Inside were scraps of fabric, a plastic flashlight, cracked down the middle, and a wallet. She flipped it open. The ID inside showed a smiling young man with messy hair. Mark Tanner, one of the missing. Her throat tightened. After 20 years, this was the first trace of any of them beyond the original search. But the triumph was short-lived, because tucked beside the wallet was something else. A Polaroid. The film was faded, but the image was clear enough. Four figures, standing at the edge of the ridge, their backs to the camera. Daniel, Mark, Alyssa, Jenny, and behind them, in the mist, a fifth figure, taller, watching. The caption scrawled at the bottom in smeared ink, "The ridge keeps what belongs to it." Laura's hands shook as she stuffed the photo into her bag. Her chest tightened with the realization that she wasn't just uncovering a mystery, she was stepping into it. Someone had been here long after the search ended, documenting the four friends as though they weren't victims, but possessions. The fog thickened until she could barely see her own boots. Every direction looked the same, every rock a mirror of the last. But through the haze, she saw a faint glow, lantern light. She staggered toward it, heart hammering, until she reached a ledge overlooking the valley. There was nothing there. No lantern, no figure, only the endless sweep of trees and shadow below. Then the light flared again, behind her this time. She turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing the fog, but there was nothing. Just the faint echo of footsteps retreating into the mist. She whispered into her radio, her voice trembling. "Ramirez, I think someone's out here with me." The static crackled, then cleared just long enough for his reply. "Get back to the trail, now." But when she spun around, the trail was gone. The mist had swallowed it whole. The backpack was found, 20 years too late. It sat half buried in the shale of a remote ridge in northern Utah. Its canvas torn, its straps sun-bleached, but intact, like a relic that had been waiting patiently for someone, anyone, to notice. A hunter, tracking mule deer through the scree, stumbled across it, tugged it free from the rock, and froze when he saw what was inside: a cracked water bottle, a rusted compass, and a notebook whose last page ended mid-sentence. The date scrawled above it was October 6th. That was the day four college friends, Daniel, Mark, Alyssa, and Jenny, vanished during a weekend hike through the Wasatch backcountry. They'd been inseparable, a tight-knit group, bonded by late-night study sessions and dreams bigger than the small towns they came from. They set out for what should have been a 2-day trek, carrying light packs and youthful confidence, joking that they'd return with photos and stories no one else could match. They never came back. The search that followed was the largest the county had ever seen. Dozens of volunteers combed the ridgelines, helicopters scoured the valleys, dogs tracked every faint scent through the forest. The only clue they ever found was a single boot print pressed deep in mud near the trail's end, and even that was smudged, indistinct. The case became a cautionary tale, the kind whispered at campsites and retold in news specials. Parents warned their children, hikers glanced over their shoulders, and the ridge earned a grim nickname: the Hollow Mile. The backpack changed everything. Detective Laura Kane was called in when the hunter turned it over. 2 decades of sun and snow had worn it thin, but inside, the notebook was a time capsule. Its pages traced the group's journey. Sketches of wildflowers Alyssa had drawn in careful pencil, a rough map Mark had scrawled with arrows pointing toward ridgelines, notes about jokes Jenny had told by the fire, and then, near the end, Daniel's handwriting, jagged, frantic. "We saw something. Not sure if it was real. Lights on the ridge. Moving fast. Too fast. Mark thinks it's hunters. Alyssa says we should head back. Jenny is scared. I can hear." The sentence ended there. The page after was blank. Laura's heart pounded as she turned the brittle sheets. In 2 decades of chasing cold cases, she had learned that objects speak louder than witnesses. This backpack wasn't just evidence, it was testimony from the grave. She drove to the ridge herself, the notebook in her bag. The wind was sharp, biting at her jacket, carrying with it the faint whistle of something hollow. The rocks stretched out in jagged teeth, the same terrain the four friends had vanished into. She stood there for a long time, staring at the endless gray and red of the landscape, trying to imagine what they'd seen. Back in town, she pulled the case files from 1995. The reports painted a picture of youthful optimism, crushed under merciless terrain. Four friends in their early 20s, heading into the mountains, with maps that didn't account for sudden storms or disorienting fog. Yet what unsettled Laura wasn't what was in the files. It was what was missing. The ranger logs mentioned lights, spotted that night, reported by a pair of campers miles away. That note was underlined in the margin, but no follow-up existed. The coroner's office had cataloged the boot print, but no plaster cast had ever been made. And in the interviews, one name came up 3 separate times. A guide, hired briefly by the group before they set out, who vanished from the narrative entirely after the first day. His name was carved into the intake sheet. Elias Voss. Laura dug deeper. Elias had been in his 30s in 1995, an experienced mountaineer who supplemented his income by leading backcountry expeditions. Witnesses remembered him as intense, quiet, a man who spoke only when necessary. He had taken the group up the first stretch of the ridge, then, according to his own statement, turned back when they decided to go farther on their own. But something about the way his account ended felt too neat, too careful. The notebook hadn't mentioned him once. Laura tracked down Elias's last known address, a cabin tucked deep in the woods, 50 miles from the nearest town. The place looked abandoned, the porch collapsing, the windows blind with dust. But when she pried open the door, her flashlight beam caught on shelves lined with maps, dozens of them, each marked in red ink, the ridges crisscrossed with symbols she didn't recognize. And on the table, beneath a film of dust, sat another notebook. The first page was dated October 16th, 1995, the day before the group vanished. They want to go farther. I told them no. They laughed. They don't understand what waits beyond the hollow mile. I won't be responsible. I won't be blamed, but I can't stop them. If they cross, they're not coming back, not whole. Laura's blood ran cold. The second page was worse. They saw the lights again last night. Not stars, moving where no man should climb. The ridge remembers. The ridge keeps what belongs to it. If they see, if they hear, then it begins again. The last page was blank, save for a single smear of ash. Laura left the cabin shaken. The case had always been unsolved, but it had never suggested something more than a tragic accident. Now she was staring at something far stranger, something that made the notebook's frantic final words feel like a warning instead of paranoia. She carried both notebooks back to the station and spread them out side by side. One written by the victims, one by the man who was supposed to protect them. 2 accounts, days apart, both ending in silence. And as she studied them, she realized something Elias had written was true. The ridge remembered. The question was, what exactly had it kept?